You can see? Okay, perfect.
Okay, so next talk, Andrew Urilyon, who will talk about wave packet gas simulation of generalized fluids. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to talk. I'm very sorry I couldn't be there in person. It was kind of a bit of an adventure to eventually not get everything organized in time. But all the same, I'm very happy to try to present some of my work, which is Jitendra had mentioned, is sort of in collaboration also with him and Jacopo, as sort of a joint project. So what I want to talk to you about is how to simulate what we refer to as sort of generalized hydrodynamics, but maybe it's more we'd like to call generalized fluids as a wave packet gas. And as I said, this is work done in collaboration. So specifically the stuff I'll be talking about today will be stuff that is done in collaboration with Jacopo de Nardis, Leonardo Biagetti, and Jitendra Kathapelli, who just gave his talk. So there maybe be a little bit of overlap, maybe hopefully not so much between the two of us, but certainly some based on what he just spoke about. And so to begin, I want to just remind ourselves, what are we trying to describe? We're trying to describe a many-particle system where the particles follow really simple rules, which in the classical picture is very nicely pictured because you can really look at trajectories, you can trace the particles, and you can see how they behave according to some simple rules. But even though there are simple rules, we of course know that these are the number of particles in your system sort of make these simple rules still very complicated. And so a method of resolving this complication is to instead focus on sort of a coarse-grained picture where we begin with where we impose a fluid cell over your coordinates, if you like, and average and find certain modes that relax more slowly, so-called slow modes, and fast modes, which don't meaningfully contribute to the dynamics when you integrate over this coarse picture. And if you do this, you of course, at least for a generic system, obtain not conventional hydrodynamics, where you have maybe a few conserved quantities, most commonly sort of particle number, momenta, energy, maybe some more depending on the specific model, but this is quite familiar. So you get your Euler equation, your Navier-Stokes equation in general, etc. However, when we have an infinite number of conserved charges, you need to do things a little bit different. And so instead of having just a few equations that describe a few slow modes, you instead have, in principle, an infinite number of equations that describe a tower of locally conserved fields, or approximately locally conserved fields that decay very slowly. And this, eventually, if you do some work, gives you generalized hydrodynamics, which we've seen sort of in different contexts. And so this is, you might ask, why exactly do we need to look at this case of infinitely many conserved charges, because it's this sort of an exotic situation in a sense, which is a fair point, but it's actually maybe less exotic than one would think, because these are really experimentally realizable in many different settings, usually with cold atoms, but as Alvise told us, also in soliton gases, and sort of other tabletop experiments. It's actually not so hard to find, well, okay, I say not so hard as a theorist, but it is very possible to find these sorts of systems realized in a lab, which gives us an opportunity not only to look at sort of questions of theoretical interest, but also to compare these back again to experiment and sort of have a very fruitful sort of discussion between the two different fields. And so with this in mind, what I want to propose is a way of modeling generalized hydrodynamics using sort of maybe a kind of simplified picture in some ways that really begins from the microscopics of the model and then builds up to the hydrodynamics. And so to do that, what I want to start with is really maybe everyone's sort of sick to hear it again, but this hard sphere or hard rod model. And what is oh my goodness, okay, sorry, there's a strange bug in this program. Anyway, so the hard rod model, where the hard rods involve two particles coming together, and once they come together, the two particles will experience a scattering event and collide. So if you like, let me just draw this picture here. Hopefully you can see it. Once they reach a distance A, as the particle coming in V1, and a particle leaving. The particle exchanges its momenta and leaves out the other side after doing a hop. And same with the left moving particle. And if you do this over many steps and then average over time, what you find is that instead of moving with what we may refer to as the bare velocity, the particle will move with some effective velocity, sort of addressed quantity. And in fact, this effective velocity is a state-dependent function in a sense, because it really depends not only on the initial or the single particle's movement, but also on the single particle's movement in the environment around it. And as such, we can coarse grain our system, as we sort of described in the hydrodynamic picture, and then really write down sort of equations of state that tell us about, okay, we have now sort of an evolution equation and an equation relating how our velocity gets addressed over time. And this is sort of the key idea behind the hard spheres or hard rods model, but also, in a sense, how one can get back, how it's related to general quantum integrable models. Because for quantum integrable models, what we have is actually quite a similar picture, where we have when two, well, we've heard the name of these wave packets, come together, you have some scattering that happens, which is controlled by this sort of scattering shift, or T. And in this scattering shift, then we have some output or we have some exchange of rapidities or momenta, and they then leave. And this is really, in some sense, mathematically almost the same picture as what we have for hard rods. And so with this in mind, we can, in fact, sort of put a similar picture. Maybe there's a bit of an abusive notation here, because I've sort of put maybe a classical distribution, but I've assigned to this initial classical distribution a scattering kernel associated with the Lieb-Liniger model. And if you do this, you can really sort of do the same picture, and you say, okay, two particles come together. They, in the Lieb-Liniger case, they sort of stick. And then over time, this leads to some effective velocity, and then then the only additional complication we really have for the formulas that we encountered before was that now we have a scattering kernel that relies not only on the sort of a constant, but something that's rapidity dependent. So it's for sure more complicated, but in principle, it's not so bad, right? And then, of course, you can put this in a potential, and you find sort of these generalized hydrodynamics in a potential. So this is very good. And so this is so far we've just talked all about this is from a perspective of fluid cells. And so what you can do naively, and what has been done naively, is previously it was to really then say, okay, well, what if I'm interested in higher order corrections? Say I want to look at diffusion, because really, okay, some hydrodynamics is very nice, but at the Euler scale, we can't really thermalize things very nicely. What we would like is a way to thermalize, so we can really understand how how things approach maybe more conventional hydrodynamics, or how the integrability breaking, or how the integrability breaking effects sort of come into can be realized. And if one does this, and maybe go back to hard rods again, you can make some quite a few checks on the diffusive equation, but I think what sort of is a very nice one is to look at the kurtosis, which is the distance of the distribution that you're looking at, in this case, the density distribution, from a Gaussian. And so this tells you, in a sense, how far away you are from thermalization, or it gives you sort of a bit of a metric for it. But what one finds, if you look back at hard rods, which you really expect generalized hydrodynamics to work maybe quite well, is that intermediate times, there's actually a deviation between the microscopic dynamics given by the dotted line and the generalized hydrodynamics given by the solid line. And this is a bit of an issue, you would say, because then what's going on here? This is clearly something's not quite right. So although the diffusive term seems to work very well, or the diffusive term as expanded for fluid cells seems to work quite well, it seems to fail at intermediate times. And then, okay, at long times, maybe you can quibble. And okay, so now to flash a big amount of stuff on the screen all at once. And sorry, there's some issues at the last second. But the true equation for the diffusive scale instead incorporates both a single equation, this first one, which involves the evolution of one-point functions on the left and 2-point functions on the, well, 2-point functions sort of at sort of a point split around a single point on the right, and a second equation, which is really the evolution equation for just 2-point functions. So it's 2-point functions in terms of the field, so equal time correlation functions over time. And so this is now, it's quite a difficult problem to solve this equation. In principle, it's possible. It's very nice that we have it. But in terms of practical use, it's kind of a bit of a mess. So instead, the idea is our idea is we would like to evolve an initial state that's fluctuating and just propagate this forward in time. And if we do it correctly, as you can sort of see on the right-hand side, then we can get something that should still exhibit these same effects, but hopefully with a lower computational cost. So how to do this? And so where we want to start from is we want to start really from the, in a sense, Euler scale, but I will say it's sort of Euler scale, but with fluctuations, which should be really the whole picture here. Generalized hydrodynamic equation, which I mark with densities with fluctuations marked with a tilde. And so here we really claim that this fluctuating state should evolve over time on the left, but there's actually a very nice transformation, which has been known for a number of years, but has become maybe much more popular in the last little bit, where we can take the interacting coordinates and map them to a set of free coordinates. This is very convenient, of course, because when you're working with free coordinates, particularly in the absence of a field, you can really just jump to the final solution as you want. So it's sort of I think this appeared, almost I think a year after GHG was first found, but it was sort of lost for a number of years and has since reappeared. And so this is quite a nice way of evolving, but what we want to do is we actually want to reverse the direction. So instead, we're of course going to still try to do the evolution in this free particle coordinates. But what we want to do is we want to find a free particle, a free state that corresponds to the interacting state, which requires that we be able to map forward from free particles to interacting particles. And this involves, sort of maybe going back for a sec to give us a bit more attention. So this X, this is sort of the bare coordinates in the free particles. This is our interacting coordinates. And so you see there's a sort of, and then here is maybe the important part, the scattering kernel. It contains, in a sense, all the physical information. And then there's just some signs, but it tells you about what's going on around you. And to obtain the interacting coordinates that correspond to a set of free coordinates, one has to minimize, or one of the possible ways of doing it, maybe there's more, but this is the one I know about, is to minimize a surface that you define in terms of the bare coordinates, the momenta, and the interacting coordinates, or a set of possible x coordinates, x tilde. And this minimization of the surface is a bit of a delicate procedure, because of course there are scenarios where, particularly where the scattering kernel can take either positive or negative values, where minimizing is not, you can get more than one solution, so it could be a bit of a problem. But proceeding, we'll maybe just ignore this technical subtlety, because for all the pictures I'll be showing, we won't really have to worry so much about them, about this multiple solution issue. So now the question is, how can I take these two ideas and combine them? So I want to to remind, we want to take we want to just find a free fluctuating state and identify it with an interacting fluctuating state. But this is actually quite almost, it's a fairly trivial problem in a sense. We know exactly how we can generate a free particle state, particularly in an inhomogeneous case, using, say, a point-on-point process, which initially distributes free particles in an uncorrelated way. And what we'll say is that we'll do a transformation, and this transformation to the interacting coordinates will automatically give us the correlations between the particles that we expect to see based on our integrable model, presuming that we maybe distribute our free particles with the correct free density. And so the idea is we place a first particle and then a second particle, a distance r sampled from some exponential distribution, and then a second position or a third part or a fifth particle here, a distance r from that, and a sixth particle, etc., etc., etc. What you can also do is, if you prefer to impose Fermi-Dirac statistics, sort of doing a sort of maybe kind of strange semi-classical picture, you can put a grid that is defined with values defined according to the free particle distribution, and each grid point, throw a number and insert a particle based on whether you are smaller than this number or not. And if you do this and then apply the the inverse transformation I described, you of course recover your density, which is more or less guaranteed. But what is maybe a little bit less trivial, but in fact actually also guaranteed from the mathematics, is that you also obtain the two-point correlation function. And so here, this picture, these sort of slices of these two-point correlation functions, actually for an inhomogeneous system. So as long as the inhomogeneity is smooth enough, this method works even there. So I mean, okay, you can't do exactly this point-on-point process. You have to do this more grid system, but the point is the logic still applies, that you start with some initial free system with free fluctuations in a sense, and these give you now, after the mapping, a fluctuating or an initial state that corresponds correctly to the quantum integral model of interest. Okay, and so just to maybe sum this all up, the point is we have now a free particle system that we evolve or that we transform to some interacting or some, okay, so hard rods, I don't know, maybe you say they're interacting or not, but depending on which scattering kernel we choose, we can get repulsive hard rods, which is the usual picture I showed before. We can, if we insert instead a positive A into the kernel, we can get attractive hard rods, which I would say behave basically the same, but at the level of trajectories are actually look more like the Lieb-Liniger model, which is sort of interesting, I think, at least as a sort of toy. And then, of course, if you really want to, the actual model of interest is doing something like Lieb-Liniger, where now things are really rapidity dependent. And this is also no problem. And you can do it. As you see, just to maybe point out that the attractive models are quite similar together, although for Lieb-Liniger, of course, you see there's maybe more variability in the amount of time that the particles stick together. And so with this, what we can do is we can really look at how different setups behave. So in particular, we're not limited by the sort of more conventional generalized hydrodynamic approaches, which don't allow us to look at equal time correlation functions. With this model, because we have access to the trajectories, and then we run many, many, many samples, say on the scale of 10,000, and then you can make basically whatever measurements you want on top of this. Although the caveat being that it's either classical or semi-classical. We don't really have a full quantum picture. So it's for sure not the whole story yet, but it's maybe an interesting aspect of the story. And so this is pictured for the red is repulsive hard rods, and the blue is attractive hard rods. And you see that the pictures are very similar, but I think this plot is quite interesting because the potential we're looking at here is a cosine potential. You can see sort of up here on the right, which so we begin with some trapped homogeneous, some homogeneous potential in a flat trap, punch it with a cosine potential, and then allow it to evolve. And what we observe is not only that, so of course the equal time, the kurtosis over time seems to be going to 0, which suggests Gaussian structure. However, what we find is, in fact, this is not, if you zoom in and you take a logarithmic look at this kurtosis, it's not quite at 0. And in fact, if you look at the long-range correlation functions, what you observe is that at long times, specifically sort of this solid line, so the dotted line here is the initial the initial equal time correlation function. But what you see is that at long times, even at the diffusive timescales, you see the presence of long-range correlation, suggesting that although the kurtosis is maybe not so sensitive to it, there is some deviation from Gaussianity here. And also this is also present in the attractive hard rod case. And so, yeah, but just looking at the plots, it's not so obvious. And you can see maybe the reason why is because although the long-range equal time correlation function is present, it's not huge, right? But this is not the end of the story, because of course there are actually many different scenarios you can realize using our method. So a quadratic trap on the left here and a quartic trap on the right. And what you find is that the form of the long-range correlation function changes depending on the exact setup we're using. So here we have sort of a Bragg pulse, sort of two rapidities with a sort of distributed throughout the system. And we crunch them into either the quadratic or the quartic trap. And we see that the quartic trap, although it's at the time scales we were able to reach, it's still not quite thermal. The kurtosis seems like it's going to, it seems like it's becoming more thermal. So it's doing maybe what's sort of expected. However, for the quadratic trap, this is not really the case. It really seems like everything is totally flat at the long times, and there's not a whole lot of evolution happening anymore. So it's kind of, which is consistent with what's expected, but it's sort of interesting that we're able to replicate this behavior from sort of this trajectory picture. And so that's very nice, but so far this has all been hard rods, sort of attractive and repulsive. But you can also do this for the Lieb-Liniger model itself. Sort of, as I said, we insert the Lieb-Liniger scattering kernel into the trajectories, and beginning from a classical distribution still, but still I think an interesting thing to do, and really insert a very strong kind of integrability effect, integrability breaking effect, such as here this dipole is sort of supposed to model sort of dipole repulsion. And what we find is that although you do see at early times long-range correlation functions, these long-range correlation functions quickly die out, which is to be expected based on the type of interaction that the sort of extra interaction we're inserting into the model. It's quite nice, and we see that really like at fairly early times, the correlations or long-range correlations are really totally dead, even though you're maybe not quite Gaussian yet, as you can see from, or at least not visibly so, looking at the distribution of the density itself. It's quick. It's clearly thermalizing, or clearly something is happening in this direction. So this is quite nice. And so what this method allows us to do is really look at a variety of systems in a variety of contexts without maybe adding so much additional complications. And so what I'm working on now is to do with trying to model the XXZ spin. So I'd say XXZ spin chain, but really a modified XXZ spin chain to make the simulation a little bit easier, because here we have a couple different complications, of course. The XXZ model, as many people here will no doubt know, consists of many different particle species. And so we can do the method I sort of described before of introducing these free particle fluctuations and then doing the transformation. Requires a little bit of modification, but it's actually it doesn't require so much. You basically prepare a free fluctuating state for each particle type, combine all the different particle types onto a single plot, do the transformation, and then truncate in the bulk, and you obtain a fluctuating initial state for our toy XXZ model. And why do I say it's a toy? Well, for us, we have a simplified scattering kernel. So here there's no rapidity dependence. Not to say that, just to say that this makes the statistics much, much, much easier, because now we don't need to worry about having many different types of rapidities, which sort of, in a sense, sort of maybe isn't a totally new type of particle, but really complicates the transformation. And with a simplified bare, or with a bare velocity, whose asymptotic behavior is also Okay, so I maybe mislabeled this a little bit, but whose asymptotic behavior replicates the behavior of the XXE velocity. So it's sort of this should be for large delta, the velocity is basically it's non-zero, as you can maybe see from this second plot here. The velocity is non-zero for the first string.
Andrew, if you could conclude soon.
Yes, sorry.
Or yeah. Okay.
I'm nearly finished, yes. For the XXE, for the velocity, quickly goes to zero, and we were able to replicate the diffusion. And maybe what's more interesting is the probability distribution function predicted for large delta, or very closely. I mean, you can see some tails, and there's some reason for this, but we won't describe it. And the correct temperature, or the correct time scaling as well. And okay, we can also double check this and see that it propagates the initial state quite well based on sort of our expectations of it being propagated as sort of a Gaussian. But what's maybe more interesting is that we can send this to delta is equal to 1, where we expect super diffusion. And in our model, we also, our toy model, we expect to retain this effect. And what we see is that the diffusion coefficient corresponding to each spin type, of course, increases over time. Well, not over time, or increases for each string type, as you expect, because it should diverge. And the velocities all agree very well with the theoretical value, so down there. And what we find for the distribution function of the magnetization is that it's now a Gaussian. It's no longer it's a Gaussian. I don't know, but it depends who you ask. But it's consistent with the Gaussian with a lot of noise on top, and we see that the magnetic fluctuations, the variance of the magnetic fluctuations scales as t to the 2/3, which is consistent with this sort of this KPZ kind of effect. But of course, you need more than just temperature, than just this scaling. What we need to do is to distinguish between Gaussian structure on the somewhere and the KPZ structure. But this is actually quite a small difference. And so far, I mean, you can see there's a lot of noise on the tails, and the tails are the important part. So just to say, there's a lot of things that we can now do with this. We can investigate other setups, such as this very early data for the domain wall. We want to introduce fully quantum fluctuations. And I just want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you very much for this very nice talk. Are there any questions? Yeah, Alvise?
Menaki? Yes. Andrew, thank you very much for the talk. It's really a pity you're not here in person. I've actually two questions. The first of all concern the kind of XZ simulation you're doing. If you want to see the weird fluctuation, I think that you want to focus on the easy axis regime, but it's not clear to me how you're accounting for the sign function, like for the fact that the TBA usually covers only one magnetization sector, not the other. I don't see how it is implemented in the hydrodynamics. The second question, then choose the order in which you want to answer, is about the preparation of the initial state in a quantum model. Like in the classical case, I understand Poisson statistics, they're just classical particles. How do you enforce the Pauli principal exclusion on the initial state in these classical-like simulations?
Yeah, so I'll maybe go to the second question first, and then I maybe need some clarification for the first. But so the quantum, so this, it's not a true quantum description, right? Probably I said it very quickly, but the Pauli exclusion. So the idea is that you start with some target density that you want to achieve, and you map this into or you figure out what the corresponding free particle density is, and you grid this free particle density, and in the free particle density, you really have Pauli exclusion. You enforce the Pauli exclusion, and so you basically build boxes based on sort of this de Broglie wavelength kind of picture. So it's really, really naive, and then do the mapping. And this seems to work, but I mean, I would say it's not a particularly robust kind of work, right? It's you can see, so in this plot, hopefully you can see it. This is really these are Fermi-Dirac, these are prepared with Fermi-Dirac statistics, so it's not perfect, but it does okay. But this is, so maybe the short answer is to say you impose the Fermi-Dirac statistics on the free fermions, and then this should actually even take care of that. The mapping, remember, is that they're Fermi-Dirac. But I should really emphasize this point. It's not that you're really doing, you don't capture the quantum fluctuations, right? So this should be maybe emphasized. And then the second question you're asking, sorry, maybe I need to remind myself, I should have done the first one first and the second one second. You're saying the easy access regime, so the easy access regime is larger or smaller than delta 1? I'm sorry, I always mix this up.
Delta larger than 1.
Delta, yeah. So we're in the easy access regime, and you ask,
maybe I can
where is
apply
the sign?
Andrew, I think I understand what Visi says, and indeed, no, I mean, there's no way to introduce the sign harmonization. So these are equilibrium fluctuation at zero harmonization.
Yes.
Yes. But if you want to do a domain wall with positive and negative, it's unclear how to do it. Yes.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So So I mean, this domain wall, it's not maybe the domain wall people normally do. It's just to say that you have maybe more particles on the left and fewer particles on the right.
Okay, thank you. So maybe we are very, very quick. Giga, you have a quick question, Giga, before you go for lunch.
Thank you. So here, when you're showing data for the XXX model, I mean, this was fluctuations or the structure factor?
The structure, these are magnetic. This is the distribution of the magnetic fluctuations.
Okay, they also, I mean, with this method, look at the structure factor and then compare it with the known prediction.
It's slide 46.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, so there's a bit of a subtlety here, maybe in terms of how our Toy model works. Really, we almost have something that's quite similar to hard rods. So you get these, if you look maybe closely, you get these negative values. So if we want to really just identify the structure factor directly, it's a bit of an issue. The idea now is we expect that if we have KPZ, it should be propagated by sort of a convolution with a KPZ kind of function. So this is sort of the direction we're moving in, but I didn't have time to finish this plot before for the presentation.
Can you repeat louder?
Sorry? Oh, sorry.
Okay, let me reply. So the correlation at time zero, they're not delta. See, there is some structure. So then you have to propagate this initial condition. For the diffusion case, it's just Gaussian propagator. For KPZ, I don't know, I was asking Herbert how to do it, but it's not.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we should start going to lunch. Thank you very much, Andrew, again for this nice talk.
Thank you, and enjoy lunch.
Yes. Oh, sorry, I forgot. Photo session before lunch, yeah. Thanks, Andrew.